Katie Morgan pressed her face against the thick glass window of her research station and watched the sky turn angry. Purple lightning danced across the black clouds above the mining moon of Kepler 442c. She had never seen anything like it in her 3 years working on this remote place. The storm looked alive and hungry. Her coffee cup shook on the metal table as thunder rolled across the crater where her lab sat. Katie grabbed the cup before it could fall and spill hot liquid on her research notes. She had been studying strange rock samples from the deep mines when the weather suddenly changed. One moment the sky was clear and peaceful. The next it was full of rage. The communication system on her desk crackled with static. Voices of other researchers and miners came through broken and scared. Someone was shouting about the main power station going dark. Another voice called for help from mining. Station 7, but the words got lost in electronic noise. Katie tried to call the main colony but got nothing back except angry buzzing sounds. She moved to her equipment rack and checked the readings. The electromagnetic levels were going crazy. Numbers that should stay steady were jumping up and down, like a wild animal. Her instruments had never recorded anything close to these readings. The storm was not just throwing around wind and rain, it was messing with all the electronic systems on the moon. A bright flash lit up her lab and thunder crashed so loud that her ears rang. Katie stumbled backwards as the lights went out. Emergency. Power kicked in a few seconds later, casting everything in dim red light. Her computer screens flickered back to life, but many of them showed error messages. Katie ran to her radio equipment and started checking frequencies. Most of the channels were dead or filled with static. She found one weak signal and heard colonist Pete Jackson calling for help from the South Mining Complex. His voice was frightened and hard to understand through the interference. He said, "The storm had torn apart 3 buildings and people were trapped." She tried to answer Pete, but her transmission did not seem to get through. Katie adjusted the antenna and boosted the power, then tried again. This time she heard Pete respond, but his signal was getting weaker. Within a few minutes, she lost contact completely. The storm was getting worse. Katie could see huge pieces of metal and rock flying past her window. The safety glass was thick, but she moved away anyway. Her research station was built into the crater wall for protection, but she had never imagined weather like this. Katie went to her supply closet and took inventory. She had food for maybe 5 days if she was careful. Water recycling was working, but the filters would need changing soon. The air system was running on backup power, and that would not last forever. She needed help, and she needed it fast. She returned to her radio and began sending distress calls on every frequency she could find. Most attempts resulted in nothing but static or electronic screaming sounds. The electromagnetic interference was blocking almost everything. Katie kept trying anyway because giving up meant dying alone on this rock. Hours passed and the storm showed no signs of stopping. Katie sent out emergency beacons and recorded messages explaining her situation. She described her location, her supply status, and the growing problems with her life support systems. Even if nobody could answer right now, maybe someone would hear the recordings later. The temperature in her lab was dropping. The heating system was struggling to work with limited power. Katie put on her heavy jacket and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She made herself a simple meal from her emergency supplies and tried to stay calm. As night fell, the storm became even more violent. Lightning struck the ground near her station every few minutes. Each strike made her equipment buzz and flicker. Katie worried that a direct hit would fry everything and leave her completely cut off from the outside world. She tried calling Earth on the deep space communication array, but the storm was blocking those signals too. Her messages to the Colonial headquarters got no response. Katie began to realize that she might be the only person left alive on this side of the moon. The wind howled outside her station like a living thing trying to get in. Katie checked her seals and made sure all the blast doors were locked tight. She had designed this place to handle the worst weather the moon could throw at her, but this storm was beyond anything in the records. Katie sat at her radio and kept sending distress calls. She varied the frequencies and tried different signal types. Sometimes she thought she heard voices in the static, but could never make out words. The interference was like a wall between her and the rest of human space. She started recording personal messages to her family back on Earth. Katie talked about her research and the discoveries she had made studying alien minerals. She told her sister about the beautiful sunrises on this moon and how peaceful it usually was. She did not want her last words to be full of fear. The power systems were failing slowly but steadily. Katie watched the numbers drop on her control panel and calculated how much time she had left. If the storm did not end soon, her air would run out before her food. She tried not to think about dying alone in the dark. Katie returned to her radio and kept calling for help. Her voice was getting hoarse, but she did not stop. Someone had to be out there listening. Someone had to care enough to brave this storm and come for her. She refused to believe that she would die forgotten on this remote moon. The storm raged on through the night, and Katie kept broadcasting her desperate plea for rescue. Captain Jake Sullivan was 3 days out from the Titan shipping lanes when he heard the first whisper of Katie's distress call. He was alone on the bridge of his cargo ship Free Spirit, drinking coffee that tasted like motor oil and watching the stars drift by. The ship was old and beaten up, but she was his, bought with money earned hauling supplies to places other captains were too scared to visit. Jake had been a military pilot once, flying rescue missions in the outer colonies, where pirates and worse things hunted civilian ships. He had seen too many good people die because some desk officer decided their lives were not worth the risk of a rescue mission. That was why he left the service and why he now worked alone, making his own choices about who lived and who died. Signal was weak and broken, but Jake's ears were trained to pick up distress calls through interference. He had heard too many dying voices over the years to miss another one. He fine-tuned his receiver and listened carefully as Katie's voice came through the static. She was trapped on Kepler 442c during some kind of massive storm. Jake knew that moon well, having delivered mining equipment there several times. It was a harsh place even on good days, with thin air and dangerous weather. If someone was stuck there during a real storm, they would not last long. Jake pulled up star charts and checked his current position. He was 2 days away from the Kepler system if he pushed his engines hard. Most ships avoided that area when the weather turned bad because electromagnetic storms could fry navigation systems and leave a vessel drifting helpless in space. His ship's computer, an old military AI named Compass, spoke up in its calm electronic voice. The computer advised against changing course toward such dangerous conditions. It calculated the risks and declared the rescue mission had less than 30% chance of success. Jake told the computer to mind its own business and started plotting a new course. Jake had modified his ship over the years with equipment he had acquired through trading, gambling, and sometimes stealing from pirates who would not need it anymore. His shields were stronger than standard civilian gear, and his engines could take more punishment than the original designers intended. If anyone could make it through that storm, it was the Free Spirit. He fired up the main engines and felt the familiar vibration through the deck plates. Jake had been flying this ship for 8 years and knew every sound she made. The engines were running hot but steady. He pushed the throttles forward and felt the acceleration press him back into his pilot's seat. The journey to Kepler 442c took him through some of the emptiest space in the sector. Jake tried to raise Katie on the radio several times, but the distance was too great and interference was getting worse as he got closer to the storm system. He could only hope she was still alive when he arrived. Jake spent the travel time checking his equipment and planning the rescue. The storm would make landing impossible, so he would need to find another way to reach Katie's research station. His ship carried industrial cargo handling gear that might work if he could get close enough to the surface. On the second day of travel, Jake picked up news broadcasts about the situation on Kepler 442c. The colonial government was calling it a natural disaster and had declared the moon off-limits to all traffic. Several ships had already tried to reach the survivors and had been forced back by the dangerous conditions. The official rescue fleet was still 3 days away. Jake smiled grimly and pushed his engines even harder. By the time the official rescuers arrived, Katie would be dead from lack of air or power. He had seen this before, bureaucrats making careful plans while people died waiting for help. That was exactly why he had left the military, and why he now answered only to his own conscience. The electromagnetic interference got stronger as Jake approached the Kepler system. His navigation equipment started giving crazy readings and his communication system filled with static. He switched to manual, flying, and relied on his experience to guide the ship through the growing chaos. When Jake finally reached the moon, he could see the storm from space. It covered half the surface with swirling clouds full of purple lightning. The electromagnetic readings were off the charts, higher than anything he had encountered in 20 years of flying dangerous routes. Any sane pilot would turn around and leave. Jake was not feeling particularly sane at the moment. He had come this far to help someone in trouble, and he was not about to quit now. He tried to contact Katie but got no response through the interference. She might already be dead or her radio might be broken. Either way, he had to try. The free spirit shuddered as Jake flew into the outer edges of the storm. Lightning struck. His shields and his instruments went crazy. Warning lights flashed all over the control panel and compass advised immediate retreat. Jake ignored the warnings and kept flying toward Katie's last known position. The research station was built into a crater wall on the dark side of the moon. Jake had delivered supplies there before and knew the layout. The problem was getting close enough to the surface without having his ship torn apart by the wind and lightning. The storm was like nothing he had ever seen, with electromagnetic effects that made normal flying almost impossible. Jake circled the area where Katie's station should be, fighting to keep his ship under control. The wind grabbed at the free spirit like giant hands trying to crush her. Lightning struck the hull repeatedly, making the metal ring like a bell. His shields flickered dangerously but held together. Finally, Jake spotted a faint light through the storm clouds. Katie's emergency beacon was still working, sending out a weak signal from her research station. She was alive, at least for now. Jake felt a surge of relief followed immediately by determination. He had found her, and now he had to figure out how to get her off that rock before the storm killed them both. The rescue was going to be the hardest thing he had ever attempted, but Jake had never walked away from someone who needed help. Jake stared down at the research station through the chaos of the storm and knew that landing was impossible. The wind was throwing debris the size of buildings across the surface, and lightning was striking the ground every few seconds. Any ship that tried to land would be smashed to pieces before it could touch down. He keyed his radio and tried to reach Katie again. This time he got through, her voice crackling with static but understandable. She sounded tired and scared but still alive. Jake felt relief wash over him as he heard her speak. Katie told him about her failing life support systems and dwindling power reserves. She had maybe 6 hours of air left, and the heating system was barely working. Jake could hear the fear in her voice, but also determination. She was a fighter, and that gave him hope. Jake explained that he could not land in these conditions, but he had another plan. His ship carried heavy cargo handling equipment including winches, magnetic grapples, and a loading bay that could be opened in space. If he could hover close to her station during a break in the storm, he might be able to reach her. The plan was crazy and dangerous, but it was the only chance they had. Jake would have to fly his ship just above the surface during the brief moments when the wind died down. He would rappel down to Katie's station wearing his environmental suit, and then both of them would have to get back up to the ship somehow. Katie listened to his plan and immediately started working on her end. She was smart and trained in emergency procedures. While Jake prepared his equipment, she gathered her essential research data and put on her environmental suit. They both knew they would only get one chance at this rescue. Jake opened his cargo bay and felt the ship shake as the storm tried to get inside. He secured his rappelling line to the strongest mounting point he could find and checked his suit. Systems twice. The environmental suit was military grade and could handle almost anything, but he had never tested it in conditions like this. The storm seemed to sense what they were planning. The wind picked up and lightning strikes became more frequent. Jake had to fight the controls to keep his ship steady as he waited for a break in the weather. Compass kept warning him that his hull was taking damage from the electromagnetic interference. Finally, Jake saw his chance. The wind dropped for a few seconds and the lightning paused. He immediately dove toward Katie's research station, using every bit of skill he had learned in 20 years of flying. The Free Spirit dropped like a stone through the howling air. Jake stopped his descent just 20 feet above the research station and activated his magnetic grapples to anchor the ship. The station's metal structure groaned under the sudden load but held together. He had maybe 2 minutes before the storm picked up again and tore his ship apart. Jake clipped his rappelling line to his suit and jumped out of the cargo bay. The wind grabbed him immediately, slamming him against the side of his ship before the line caught and steadied his descent. Lightning flashed all around him, and the electromagnetic pulse made his suit electronics flicker. He dropped toward the station, as fast as he dared, bouncing off the crater wall twice before landing hard on the station's roof. Jake could feel the metal structure shaking under the stress of the storm and his ship's grapples. He had to move fast before something broke. Katie was waiting for him at the emergency airlock. She had her suit on and a bag of research data slung across her back. Jake could see through her helmet visor that she was scared, but ready to trust her life to a complete stranger. That took courage, and Jake respected her for it. The airlock cycled quickly, and Katie emerged onto the roof of her station. The wind immediately tried to knock her down, but Jake caught her arm and steadied her. He pointed up at his ship, and she nodded, understanding. Getting back up there was going to be much harder than getting down. Jake's original plan had been to climb back up the rappelling line, but the storm was too violent. The line was whipping around like a snake and would beat them to death long before they reached the ship. He needed a different approach, and he needed it fast. Katie surprised him by pointing to her research equipment. She had been studying electromagnetic phenomena and had gear that might help. Working together in the howling wind, they rigged up a crude but effective solution. Katie's magnetic field generator could create a stable corridor of calm air around them. The device was not designed for this kind of use, but Katie made it work anyway. She was brilliant with technical systems, and Jake was good at making broken things function. Between them, they created a bubble of protection from the worst of the storm's fury. Jake activated his suit's built-in winch system, and they began to ascend toward the Free Spirit. The magnetic field generator worked better than either of them had hoped, keeping the wind and debris away from their bodies. They rose slowly through the chaos, protected by science and determination. Halfway up, Katie's generator started to overload. Sparks flew from the device, and Jake could see warning lights flashing on her suit display. The protective field was weakening, and the storm was trying to break through. They had maybe 30 seconds before the system failed completely. Jake grabbed Katie and activated his suit's emergency thrusters. The small rockets were only meant for short bursts in zero gravity, but he pushed them to their limit. They shot upward through the failing magnetic field as debris and lightning tried to tear them apart. They reached the cargo bay just as Katie's generator exploded in a shower of sparks. Jake hauled both of them inside and slammed the bay doors shut. The Free Spirit was shaking violently from the storm's assault, and several warning alarms were screaming for attention. Jake strapped Katie into a safety harness and ran for the bridge. His ship was being battered to pieces, and they needed to get away from the surface immediately. The grapples were starting to fail, and the hull was cracking under the electromagnetic stress. He fired the engines at full power and felt the Free Spirit lurch upward. The magnetic grapples snapped free, and the ship shot away from the research station like a bullet. Jake fought to control their ascent as the storm tried one last time to destroy them. They broke through the worst of the weather and into the relative calm of space above the storm. Jake's ship was damaged, but still flying. More importantly, Katie was alive and safe in his cargo bay. The impossible rescue had worked, though just barely. Jake set course away from the moon and began checking his systems for damage. They were not out of danger yet, but they had survived the worst part. He had pulled off another rescue that everyone else said was impossible, and that felt pretty good. Katie worked at the makeshift laboratory Jake had set up in his cargo bay, her hands moving quickly over the research data she had saved from her station. The electromagnetic readings from the storm were unlike anything in human scientific records. The patterns were too complex and too organized to be natural weather. Jake floated nearby, watching her work while keeping one eye on his ship's damaged systems. The Free Spirit was holding together, but barely. Half his navigation equipment was fried, and his shields were running on backup power. They needed to reach a safe port soon or risk being stranded in deep space. Katie looked up from her data pad, with excitement in her eyes. She had found something important in the storm patterns. The electromagnetic pulses were not random chaos, but followed mathematical sequences that suggested artificial intelligence. Something was controlling the storm, directing its fury with purpose and planning. She showed Jake the readings on her portable analyzer. The storm was following algorithms that resembled computer programs, responding to external stimuli and adjusting its behavior based on results. Katie believed they had encountered some kind of automated defense system left behind by an alien civilization. Jake studied the data with the practical eye of someone who had spent years dealing with unknown technology. He had seen plenty of alien artifacts in his travels through the outer systems. Most were dead ruins, but some still functioned after millions of years. This storm system could be one of those ancient guardians. Katie pulled up geological surveys of Kepler 442c that she had been studying before the storm hit. Deep scans had detected unusual structures buried beneath the moon's surface. The mining operations had been digging toward those structures when the storm began. She thought the excavation had triggered some kind of automatic response. Jake agreed with her theory. He had seen similar situations where human expansion had awakened sleeping alien systems. Usually those encounters ended badly for the humans involved. But this time felt different. The storm had been violent, but it had also tested them, measuring their abilities and responses. Working together, Katie and Jake began to decode the patterns in the storm's behavior. Katie's scientific training combined with Jake's intuitive understanding of alien technology proved to be a powerful partnership. They discovered that the storm was not trying to kill them, but to evaluate them. The alien defense system was running some kind of test, challenging anyone who approached the buried structures to prove they were worthy of whatever secrets lay hidden below. The storm had thrown everything it could at them, watching how they responded to danger and impossible odds. Katie realized that their successful rescue had been the key to passing the test. The alien system had measured Jake's courage in risking his life for a stranger, and Katie's determination to survive against hopeless conditions. More importantly, it had observed how they worked together, combining their different skills to overcome obstacles. As they studied the data, something strange began to happen. The storm around Kepler 442c was changing, its fury slowly diminishing. The electromagnetic interference that had been blocking all communications was fading away. Katie's instruments detected new signals coming from deep within the moon. Jake tried his long-range communications and found that he could now reach other ships in the system. Rescue vessels were finally approaching the moon, but they were too late to help the trapped colonists. Jake and Katie had been the only ones willing to brave the storm when it mattered most. The signals from beneath the moon's surface were becoming stronger and more complex. Katie worked to decode them, while Jake kept the Free Spirit on course away from the dangerous area. The messages seemed to be invitations, welcoming them to discover what had been hidden for so long. Katie made a breakthrough in understanding the alien language. The signals contained mathematical concepts and scientific formulas that were far beyond current human knowledge. The buried civilization had left behind a vast library of information, waiting for someone worthy to claim it. Jake made a decision that surprised both of them. Instead of continuing toward safety, he turned the Free Spirit around and headed back toward Kepler 442c. The storm was nearly gone now, and the moon's surface was visible for the first time in days. Katie protested that his ship was too damaged for another approach, but Jake was determined. He explained his reasoning to Katie as they descended toward the moon. Throughout history, the greatest discoveries had been made by people willing to take risks when others played it safe. The alien civilization had tested them and found them worthy, but the window of opportunity might not stay open for long. Katie found herself agreeing with Jake's logic despite the danger. Her scientific curiosity was stronger than her fear, and she wanted to be the first human to make contact with this ancient knowledge. They had already survived the impossible once, and she was willing to trust Jake's judgment again. The Free Spirit approached the moon's surface carefully, avoiding the debris fields left by the storm. Jake's piloting skills were being tested again, as he navigated through floating wreckage and damaged satellites. His ship groaned with every maneuver, but held together through determination and good engineering. They landed near the site where Katie's research station had been. The building was gone, torn apart by the storm, but new structures were rising from the ground. Ancient machinery was emerging from deep beneath the surface, activated by their successful completion of the alien test. Katie suited up and prepared to explore the alien ruins. Jake insisted on coming with her despite his lack of scientific training. They had been partners in surviving the storm, and he was not about to let her face the unknown alone. Together, they stepped out onto the surface of Kepler 442c to greet humanity's future. The alien structures were beautiful and complex, built from materials that seemed to bend light and shadow. Katie's instruments detected energy readings that defied human understanding of physics. They were about to make contact with technology that could change everything humans thought they knew about the universe. Jake and Katie approached the alien entrance together, two humans who had proven themselves worthy of secrets that had waited millions of years to be discovered. Behind them, rescue ships were finally arriving at the moon, but they were too late to be first. That honor belonged to a cargo ship captain and a research scientist who had refused to give up on each other when the universe tested their resolve. Katie and Jake stood before the entrance to the alien structure, their hearts pounding with excitement and fear. The doorway was twice as tall as a human and carved from a single piece of crystal that seemed to glow from within. Strange symbols covered the surface, shifting and changing as they watched. Katie approached the symbols with her scanner active, trying to understand their meaning. The patterns were mathematical, but also something more, carrying emotional and philosophical concepts that human language could barely express. Jake stayed close beside her, his hand near his sidearm, though he doubted any weapon would matter against technology this advanced. As Katie touched the crystal surface, the symbols began to pulse with brighter light. The alien door responded to her presence, recognizing her as one of the two humans who had passed the storm test. Slowly and silently, the massive portal split open to reveal a corridor that stretched deep into the moon's interior. The walls of the corridor were lined with more of the glowing crystal, providing gentle illumination that made their helmet lights unnecessary. The air inside registered as breathable on Katie's instruments, but they kept their suits sealed for safety. The alien atmosphere might contain elements that human lungs could not process. They walked deeper into the structure, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. The corridor opened into a chamber so large that their lights could not reach the far walls or ceiling. Katie's scanner indicated that the room was filled with machinery and data storage systems beyond human understanding. Jake whistled softly at the sight. He had seen plenty of alien ruins in his travels, but nothing like this. The technology was not just advanced, it was elegant and beautiful. Every surface curved and flowed like living art, while still clearly serving complex functions. This civilization had mastered both science and aesthetics. In the center of the chamber stood a pillar of pure light, reaching from floor to ceiling. As they approached, the light began to pulse in rhythm with their heartbeats, somehow reading their biological signatures. Katie realized that the alien system was still testing them, making sure they were truly the ones worthy of its secrets. The pillar suddenly projected images around them, three-dimensional holograms that told the story of the vanished civilization. Katie and Jake watched in wonder as the history of an entire species unfolded before their eyes. The aliens had been explorers and teachers, spreading knowledge throughout the galaxy until some great catastrophe forced them to retreat. Before dying out, the alien race had hidden libraries of their greatest discoveries on worlds throughout space. Each library was protected by automated defense systems that would test anyone who tried to claim the knowledge. Only species that showed courage, curiosity, and the willingness to help others would be deemed worthy of the legacy. Katie understood now why the storm had been so specific in its testing. The alien civilization valued the same qualities that made humanity special in the galaxy. They had been looking for people who would risk everything to save a stranger and who would work together despite impossible odds. The holographic display shifted to show technical diagrams and scientific formulas. Katie's training allowed her to recognize some of the concepts, but most were far beyond current human knowledge. The aliens were offering humanity advances in energy production, faster-than-light travel, medical science, and technologies that had no names in human language. Jake studied the displays with his practical mind, understanding instinctively how some of the alien tools might work. The technology was designed to be learned and used, not just admired. These aliens had wanted their knowledge to live on through other species who proved themselves worthy of the responsibility. A new set of holograms appeared, showing Katie and Jake themselves during their rescue mission. The alien system had recorded everything, analyzing their actions and motivations. It showed Jake's decision to risk his ship and life for someone he had never met, and Katie's refusal to give up hope even when death seemed certain. The display highlighted the moment when they had worked together to modify Katie's equipment for their escape from the research station. Their cooperation and mutual trust had been the final proof the alien system needed. Humanity had demonstrated the qualities necessary to inherit this ancient knowledge. Katie felt tears in her eyes as she realized the magnitude of what was being offered to her species. The alien library contained solutions to problems that had plagued humanity for centuries. Disease, poverty, and the limitations of slower-than-light travel could all become things of the past. Jake was thinking about the responsibility that came with such gifts. Humanity would need to prove worthy not just of receiving this knowledge, but of using it wisely. The alien race had trusted them with power that could reshape the galaxy for better or worse. The light pillar began to pulse more rapidly, and new machinery emerged from the chamber walls. The alien system was preparing to transfer its accumulated knowledge to human receivers. Katie and Jake would become the first ambassadors between their species and this ancient legacy. Katie activated her recording equipment and began documenting everything she could. The scientific data alone would revolutionize human understanding of physics, chemistry, and biology. Jake helped her gather the information, understanding that they were participants in the most important moment in human history. As they worked, more rescue ships arrived at Kepler 442c. The colonial authorities were finally responding to the disaster, but they were too late to be part of the first contact. That honor belonged to two people who had demonstrated humanity's greatest strengths when it mattered most. The alien system completed its knowledge transfer and began to shut down. its purpose finally fulfilled after millions of years of waiting. Katie and Jake emerged from the structure carrying data that would change the course of human civilization. They had proven that their species possessed something special, something worth preserving and nurturing. Jake's damaged ship lifted off from the moon's surface one last time, carrying its precious cargo toward human space. Behind them, the alien structure sank back into the ground, its mission complete. The storm was over, and the test had been passed. In the weeks that followed, Katie and Jake became heroes to their species. More importantly, they had opened a door to humanity's future among the stars. The alien knowledge would take decades to fully understand and implement, but the first steps had been taken by two people who refused to abandon hope. Katie continued her research, now with access to scientific principles that would have taken humans centuries to discover on their own. Jake returned to flying his cargo routes, but now carried the satisfaction of knowing that his simple act of courage had changed everything for his species. Humanity had been tested by the universe and found worthy of greatness. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and now humans had the tools and knowledge needed to explore it safely. All because a cargo ship captain had heard a distress call in the night and decided that no one should die alone.